POME acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the true sovereigns, caretakers and custodians of the land now known as the City of Yarra, where POME resides. We acknowledge that the Wurundjeri's connection to country extends back tens and tens of thousands of years, and we also acknowledge the other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that make up the local community, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. So welcome, Damon Kowalski. You're the new exhibitor at POME. You're on now for the next month. You're exhibiting in the rear gallery here, so when people come on through and you'll be able to see your works. Your works, they seem to be very based around earthy tones, and what do you say about that?
Well, that's true. The early stage of my work came out of looking at a lot of vernacular architecture in North Africa, which was invariably the stone or mud brick. So inherently in that you have the colours of the earth. And then in 2016 I went on a residency to rural France and was completely blown away by the colour of the natural environment. It was midsummer, everything was extremely fertile, the greens were saturated. We don't actually have greens in Australia. What we think of as greens are often browns, reds, blues, but in France it was this absolutely vivid green, and that overwhelmed my sense of the place, and it seemed to not respond to colour in that way, in combination with the architecture that was my original interest. So it took the work in quite a new direction.
And when was this piece that we're seeing now
finished?
So
most of these works were made in the early part of 2020. Like in those, there was I think maybe 2 months before the world ended. Plus there might be one or two from late in 2019. So it's recent work in terms of, if we take out the fact that all of last year disappeared.
And the process, tell us about the process, how you go about making.
Okay, so they're
pieces.
etchings on copper plates. It's quite an old process. It was developed in the 15th century in Germany out of the armoury trades. So if you think about knights' armour, they used to engrave designs because amazing designs because the knights wanted to look fancy as well as be dead. And at some point someone realised that you could take if you flattened the armour out, you could get an impression out of the carvings. And so that was engraving, and then they thought, well, engraving is a very slow, expensive process. How can we do this quickly and cheaply? So they covered the armour or the etching plate with a very thin layer of bitumen, which is acid resistant. You scratch lightly through the acid, and then you scratch lightly through the bitumen to expose the metal. The acid digs the grooves, much as if you'd engraved the grooves, and it went from there. So essentially it hasn't changed as a process in 500 years.
And where are you finding your armour in Australia?
Some nightclubs.
Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah, I think it's interesting. So there's a limited of 12 pieces usually related to your etchings. Is that correct?
Yes, so generally each image will be printed 12 times.
And that plate, when you say it's destroyed after that, what does it get reused, melted?
Well, I turn it over and use the back.
Yes.
Because 2 sides, and then it gets sent to the scrap metal merchant and melted down and turned into
something else.
Tram lines or overhead power lines.
COVID signs.
No.
And so last year, 2020, stopping. So you've had an exhibition down at Warrnambool that was on and off due to COVID restrictions.
Yes. It ended up actually being at exactly the time that it was supposed to have happened at, but it just was on then off, then on then off, and ended up in the same place.
And how did the COVID whole period affect your creative flow?
Well,
creative processes?
all the studios. I mean, obviously Melbourne was in lockdown, so people were stuck in their homes. I'm lucky in that I have a studio at home and always have had, but I had tended to go to other studios to print because the presses are large, expensive, and unless you've got reinforced floors, they tend to go through them. So all of that was closed last year. So I prepared a number of plates, thinking or knowing that at some point I would get back to a studio, but I also used the time to work on some drawings that had been in my head for a couple of years, but I hadn't actually had a chance to make them. So that was good to be able to kind of do some side projects.
Yeah.
And one of those drawings has actually been blown up and put on a shop front in the City of Melbourne recently, which was a City of Melbourne project, again, COVID-based, where they commissioned artists to make work that would be printed on vinyl and then put on empty shop fronts. So instead of having dead retail
Streets
space,
walking
dead
down,
street
yeah.
spaces, they had artworks. So it was really good that that local councils, the arts organisations, galleries. I mean, a lot of galleries started having online exhibitions. They'd have a call out for a particular theme, and saying how can we find an audience, maintain our community, given the strictures of what was happening.
And I think that shopfront program is something that can be considered regardless of restrictions to be
I think it should be. I
in.
think it should be. I mean, I live off Chapel Street, and you see shop after shop that's dead, and vinyl printing is not very expensive.
No, we've used it a bit here, and
I mean, it's actually
amazing.
it's really very cheap, but it means you can have a huge amount of art in the community. And the other people who've done very well with that sort of community street art is Metro Tunnel. So they have, because they've got so many building sites around Melbourne, and instead of it just being blank walls, they've got artists to come in and make stuff. So there's an engagement between the city, the kind of the construction, infrastructure, building, and the arts. And I think it's really important that we are integrated into all these parts of the community.
How do you find locations for your work, and what do you see in the future happening?
Well, I mean, I'm a printmaker, so the work is very portable and can easily be sent to galleries within Melbourne, around Victoria, Australia, internationally. So developing, actually being able to distribute stuff is actually really easy as a printmaker. So that part of it's good. And there is a niche audience of people who like prints and works on paper. I know we were talking about LPs before, but it's that the physicality of print, and it's all handmade. It's not digital output. There are people who want it and are interested in it, and yes, galleries come and galleries go, but that demand to have art remains, and the particular kind of avenues by which it's distributed will vary, but people want stuff on their walls.
Do you know how your works are being used or hung? Is it?
I mean, people do occasionally send pictures of the art that they've collected in their home, and that's great.
Yeah, and commercially too, is it? How have you seen? What's the spectrum of where your work's been?
So, I mean, it's everything from personal collections through to architects' offices. I've done some installation works with retail companies, ESOP. There's just a huge variety of ways to get your work out there, and we live in a world where there are many avenues, and some are digital, some are real, and you're able to take advantage of them.
And what's the future 2021 shaping up for you like?
Well,
You've got a project.
it's quite busy. I'm doing a print project with Di Longley in Trentham in April, and that's using a particular technology that she is expert in, and she's invited artists from around Australia to come and work with her and bring their skill set against her skill set and see what develops out of that collaboration. And then in June, I'm going up to Sydney to learn to paint from a well-established artist called Pamela Griffith, who many years ago said she would like to teach me how to paint.
Wow. And you're taking her up.
And I'm finally taking her up. And until last year, I had travelled between 3 and 6 months of the year, so it hadn't been possible to actually find, and she was travelling and very busy, so it wasn't possible for us to actually find time to be together. But COVID has made everything much more local, so that's good. And then probably later in the year, I'll head back down to Portland and print the next series of works. So no, this year's busy.
Yeah, no, congratulations. And everyone who's listening out there, come on down, spread the word. You're in for a very nice experience, a magnificent experience, actually, when you go into the Rear Gallery of POME. And Damon, thank you very much.
Thank you,
for being
Bernie,
here,
and thank you, POME.